Okay, new Parsha this week. Parsha's Mishpatim. We usually start with Tanya. Tanya this week is actually kind of interesting. Tanya speaks about we can unify ourselves with Hashem, with God, through Torah study. Much better, much more than mitzvahs. When you study Torah, you think words of Torah and you articulate words of Torah. You are what you think. I know sometimes we say you are where your mind is. I guess you can kind of apply that here. The Alter Rebbe is making a novel statement that when you think words of Torah, especially halacha is the embodiment of God's will, his level of will and desire. It's embodied in the physical world, through halacha. That's why a lot of us probably like halacha. It's, wow, it's clarity on everything. And on a spiritual level, it's the embodiment of God. A way to connect with God, become unified with God. That's what's unique about Torah study. So enjoy Torah study. I was learning in my morning chavrusa, my morning group that I learn Chassidus with. There are 3 levels of Torah study. There's one that really connects with the body, which means you learn Torah just to know what to do. That's connected with like the physical world. So I know physically in this world what to do. Then there's a second level to connect to God. And that's really like a spiritual connection. It's really from the neshama, from the soul. I'm trying to have my soul connect with God. That's the second level. And then there's the highest level. The highest level is essence to essence. I study just because I naturally want to do whatever God wants. This feels natural to me. I'm not doing it for any reason. It's natural. My father's a teacher. I don't know if he's on. He's not on. He's a teacher. And I remember he said when he first started teaching, he would say, I wanted to give a good class. And at the end of the class, I would say, I have a good class. It was a good class. That wasn't a good class. And he goes, and he came to a certain point where he said, I just want the students to understand. I don't even care about how what's it doing for me? How's this class doing for me? Are people having a good time? Are they entertained? Are they learning? But what do they think of me? He goes, at a certain point, after a certain number of years, it just became, do they understand the information? Is it applicable to their lives? Is it relevant to them? Will they grow from this? I don't care about me. It doesn't even have to be me. He actually started delegating out to other teachers, kind of like what I do. I feel like that was kind of an interesting, that was like an example, a mushal, a parable, as we call it, that came to mind when I thought about that. So in this week's Parsha comes after the incredible historical event of God revealing himself. The inspiration was beyond this world. You can imagine. It says that God held a mountain over our heads and said, take this Torah or I'll kill you. But we know on a deeper level, what does it mean that God held a mountain over our heads and said that? Meaning he showed us so much revelation, so much love. We had no choice but to say yes. It was kind of, in a way, it wasn't the problem with inspiration, which we'll talk about right now, actually. The problem with inspiration, I have a friend who said, inspirational videos only make me want to watch more inspirational videos. They don't actually do anything for you. They get you excited, but they don't necessarily, it's kind of like a drug. It's inspiration. You fill up and then you're left with this down. As long as you don't have the inspiration coming, you fall. The reason why Mishpatim, this week's Parsha, comes right after the previous Parsha is because the previous Parsha was all about inspiration. And now we get right into laws, very concrete, tort law. We deal with a lot of tort law because you have to channel that inspiration down into something physical right away. It says that the Alter Rebbe one time, the first Chabad Rebbe, was so inspired, he felt his soul about to leave his body, and he quickly made himself a bagel with butter. something very physical, so that it would bring him down. It was like the flame is trying to leave the wick, but make sure the wick is very strong. And thank God for the wick, because it keeps the flame down. Thank God for the body, because the physical part of us, because it keeps the soul in our body, that we can continue in this physical world and do what God wants. So that's why we move right into Mishpatim. What is Mishpatim? Mishpatim literally means judgments. There are three categories of mitzvot. There's chukim, edus, and mishpatim. Chukim means mitzvahs that don't make any sense, like, para aduma, they're burning the red heifer. If you become tuma, if you become tameh, if you become the spiritual impurities don't even make any sense. A classic one is kosher. Kosher doesn't really make any sense. Tefillin doesn't really make any sense. Most of the mitzvahs they don't really make so much sense. You might think, okay, of course, there's like Kabbalistic reasons and there's Hasidic reasons, but if I want to just explain it to somebody off the street, the reason why you have to put on tefillin is because it has to be black straps with this box with two shins on the. They'll be like, what is it? I can do another way. If you want me to remember God and think about God and do something on my head, I can think of better ideas. So that's called chukim. Chuk, a statue. And then there's edus, which are kind of like commemorations. So we have matzah on Passover because to remember that we had matzah leaving Egypt. Now, of course, again, there's spiritual Kabbalistic reasons behind matzah. It's much more than just, let's pick a tradition that we had from back in to commemorate the day. But on a very simple level, it just means, we have Purim, we do things on Purim, we give gifts on Purim because it says that's what it says to do in the Megillah. That says that the Jewish people, once we were saved, we gave gifts to each other. I don't know. You can name anything. Shofar. That's not really a good one, but whatever. Edus. And then we have Mishpatim, which people would think, okay, those are very logical mitzvahs. Don't kill, don't murder. It's not don't kill, it's don't murder. Don't honor your parents. No, honor your parents. Don't honor your parents. Logical mitzvahs. In fact, Rashi even says some of these mitzvahs we would have learned from animals if the Torah didn't teach us it. But you will soon see that these are not necessarily logical mitzvahs. It does deal with tort law, damages. A lot of this has to do with damages, stealing, and what's the restitution. But let's give a couple of examples over here of why these are not necessarily very logical mitzvahs. For example, let's say you have a fire in your house, and the fire goes and gets out of control, and it burns your neighbor's house down, God forbid. So obviously you're liable for their damages in their house. Except for anything which is hidden. If you have items in that house which are hidden, you don't have to pay for them. Doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't know, if they hid something valuable in, I don't know, a safe, and it burned the safe inside the safe, I don't believe you're liable for that. You're liable for everything else, but you're not liable for that. And the example that's given in the Gemara, in the Talmud, is like straw. I think if you have straw that's out in your room, in your stalks or whatever, straw or stalks out in your house and they burn, you have to pay for those stalks. But if you hid them somewhere, if you hid them maybe like packaged up or something like that, then you don't have to pay for them. Okay, it doesn't really make any sense. Another one is that let's say you make a pit in the middle of a thoroughfare in a public domain, and an animal, someone's animal then goes and walks into that pit. It was illegal. You shouldn't have made a pit in the middle of the thoroughfare. You made like a manhole or whatever. And if someone's animal, an ox, is just walking through and it falls in, you got to pay for the ox. If a person falls in, you're not liable, because you should have been taking care of yourself. You should have looked around where you're going. I don't know if is that so fair. Now, doesn't mean you shouldn't pay. From the Torah point of view, you don't have to pay for that fire that destroyed, whatever stuff got destroyed inside the house. You don't have to pay for this person if they get injured. Now, you probably should if you want to save your reputation. I mean, it's not from Torah's perspective. If you go to court, someone takes you to court, you won't have to pay. A lot of people, this is a point where people usually say, oh, Torah is so, it's so harsh. Like, look how easy it is to, be killed. And no, Torah, American law is way harsher. It's much easier to get sued in American law than it is to get sued in Torah law. Another example, what if a donkey falls into this pit, then you got to pay for the donkey. But if the donkey was carrying breakable glasses, like glass, you don't have to pay for the glasses. Just the donkey from the Torah. Doesn't make any sense. Why? What's the difference? And there's no reason. So even though they seem pretty logical, it's really not. Parsha opens up. Another thing that Parsha talks about over here is you should have Jewish courts. We have our own course we call it a bezdin or a bet din. If you want to convert, you have to go to a bet din. If you have any tort law, you have things that you want to deal with your neighbor, you go to a Jewish court, and it's 3 judges that sit on a panel and they hear your case, or you submit it. Just like you would normally in a court. You submit it, you write it down. What's it called? A brief. And you submit it to the court, and they issue a ruling. The Torah says you should first go to a bezdin. You shouldn't have to go to a secular court. You should deal things in a Jewish court. And secular law, at least in America, recognizes the verdicts of Jewish law, usually in cases of arbitration. It happens all the time. And if you go to a Jewish court and then you don't like the ruling, and then you try to go to a secular court, for the most part in American law, they'll refer you back down to, well, what did the Jewish court say? And you have to follow that rule. There are certain things. Now, there is a concept called Dina Demarco, that you follow the way of the land. So, for example, you follow the system as long as when it contradicts Jewish law, there's certain varying degrees. But let's give an example over here. There's Chapter 11 bankruptcy in America. If you go into debt, you have too much debts, and you file bankruptcy, your debts are forgiven. Now, you've killed your credit score for 7 years or whatever it is, but you don't have to pay any of your debts. In America, in Jewish courts, there's no statute of limitations on debts. If you owe a debt to somebody, you owe it for the rest of your life, unless the person forgives you, or it's the 50th, the 7th year, the 50th year. But there's ways around it, and people go around it. So for the most part, for all intents and purposes, to keep it simple, you owe that debt for the rest of your life. So even though you might have filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy and you don't have any debts according to American law, according to Jewish law, and a bezdin will continue to say you owe so-and-so money. Now, I don't know if with regards to a company, so maybe it's a different story, but you have to follow the Jewish court, the Jewish law. So wherever there is a case of where it's called a stira, there's a disagreement between American law and American courts and Jewish courts, you still have to follow the Jewish courts. I'm trying to think of an example. I'll tell another example. It's a very common example, and it's a horrible thing. In Judaism, in order to get divorced, the husband has to sign off on what's called a get. A get literally means a document, but here we usually borrow that term get to mean a bill of divorce. Both the man and the husband and the wife have to sign the get. Now, in American law, you want to get a divorce and one party doesn't want to get divorced. It doesn't matter. The court will say they can decide whatever they want. And they say, okay, you're divorced, you're divorced. In Jewish law, the husband has to sign it. And it's a big problem that sometimes the husband will say, if he married into a very wealthy family, pay me money. He's a real low life. Pay me money and then I'll sign the paper. And sometimes they'll never do it. It takes years, whatever. It used to be, and sometimes women are stuck. They're just stuck. There's nothing we can do. What did they used to do in the temple times? They used to beat him up. They used to beat the guy up until he says, Reitza ani. The Rambam brings it down. They would beat him up until he says, okay, I'll do it. And the Rambam explains how could you do that? I mean, that's not very nice, right? Because he says he really wants to do the right thing. Every Jew wants to do the right thing. The fact that he's not doing it, it shows that there's some sort of blockage. He's like, it's called a ruach shtos. There's some sort of folly that's entered him. So you beat him up in order to reveal the godly soul. And the Rebbe would use this very often, that people, they might say they don't want to do a mitzvah. They want that. We don't go beat them up, but what the Rebbe would say is you keep pushing and you keep, staying on them and trying to inspire them, because eventually it will break through, because the godly soul really wants to do what's right. So they used to beat them up. In fact, they used to do it in America up until pretty recently, like secretly. They would have these like gangsters, like these Hasidic gangsters that would go beat up guys and say, you better sign the paper. But then the FBI got involved and put an end to that.
I actually heard about that, even recently in Canada.
Yeah,
Beryl actually was talking about it.
Yeah, they got caught like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. A lot of Lubavitchers were a part of it. They used to go around beating up the guys.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, anyway, I mean, people were like kind of bummed out, to be honest, that they got caught. So anyway, that's unfortunately, that's a horrible situation. That's still Torah law. Nowadays they have, they put inside the ketubah, there's like a new thing now. They put in a ketubah, like a prenup sort of situation, where if the guy even says no, as long as the woman says, I want to get divorced, they're or vice versa, they get divorced. Or it follows the secular court. So whatever the secular court decides, that's what you have to do. It's like they write it into ketubah now, because it's become such an issue, unfortunately. I mean, it's not very common, but it's common enough that it's horrible. Okay, so the Torah opens up talking about, this Parsha opens up talking about someone who stole out of desperation. The Torah usually says that when people steal, they steal out of desperation. It's not so much kleptomania, or they're a kleptomaniac. They steal out of desperation. And now what happens is if you steal something, you have to give back double the amount of the value. So you have to give back the value. Let's say you sold it. Yeah, you stole something, not you. Someone sold something and they sold it, an animal, and they shechted it, they slaughtered it, whatever. A car, they stole a car. That's a better example. I'm sorry, animal's a little bit different. They stole a car and they sold it. You can't get it back. You got to pay the value of the car times 2. Now, that could be very expensive. So what typically happens is if they can't pay it back, he can sell himself into what's called slavery, but it's not really slavery. You'll see. Certainly not what you think about in the movies. The Bezdin, the Jewish court, will sell him, put him on the open market, so to speak, and somebody will have to pay him for his wages. Somebody takes him and they pay him, and all the money then goes to the person who goes right to the person who stole, whose stuff was stolen. The maximum amount of time you can be a slave, it's called an eved, a servant. Really, it's really what it is, a servant. Is 6 years, and there are many laws of how to treat this servant. You have to give him, first of all, if he's married, you got to take care of his family. That comes out of your own expense. Got to take care of his family, take care of his kids. The 3 basic rules, the 3 basic areas that you have to take care of them, or 2 of them, I'm sorry, which is give them food and shelter. And the 6th year, he goes free no matter what, even if he hasn't paid back the entire debt. Now, what happens? I just want to talk about something very briefly. Is there such thing as prison in Judaism? There is no such thing as prison as a form of punishment. The Rambam brings down 2 things. If a person committed capital punishment, usually, and he's sentenced to be killed, let's say, so they put him in a holding cell until that period of time. They get killed the same day. If he gets killed the next day, then he's sent into jail. But there's no such thing as jail as a punishment. The Rambam brings down what they would do is, if somebody is a danger to society, they'll take him off the streets. they're not putting him in prison to hurt him. They're not beating him up in prison. At least I don't think. At least the Rambam doesn't bring that down. But they take him off the streets and they put him in a holding cell, like a jail type of thing. But it's not as a form of punishment. As soon as they feel that he's rehabilitated, let's say, they let him go. There's no like you're sentenced to 30 years or 10 years or whatever it is. You just stay in there until they feel like you're okay to go back into society. Just an interesting note. The only way to get killed in Judaism is it's like impossible for capital punishment. In order to get killed in Judaism, sentenced to death, you have to have witnesses. You have to know what you're doing. They have to warn you twice while you're about to commit the act. You have to say, I know that if I kill this person, I will be sentenced to death. Like usually when somebody, God forbid, kills somebody, it happens in a matter of like seconds. It's not, there's not like this whole dialogue going back and forth. So it almost never happened that they put someone to death. But what happens, says the Gemara, what happens if you saw somebody chase someone with a knife, a butcher knife, and they run into a cave, and then the only person and then a few moments later, you see the chaser, the person holding the knife, walking out with blood dripping from the knife. And then you walk into the cave and you see the person was stabbed to death. Now, according to Torah law, he doesn't get killed. He won't be sentenced to death because he didn't get warned. You didn't see it. He didn't have two witnesses. I mean, it's like impossible. So the Rambam says usually what they would do, you think he'd go scot-free? No. What they would do is the court had like a system where they would like feed something to his stomach. They would capture him and then they would give him something that his stomach would explode or something like that. When I get to those laws again, I'll repeat them for you. I'll say it in more detail. So don't think everybody got away scot-free. But in terms of real capital punishment, like being killed and sentenced to death, that almost never happened.
So question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
In this Parsha and previous one, where when Israelites were in the desert and they were asking they were asked to stay at home on seventh day.
Yeah.
And they caught someone, I guess a person was collecting, I don't know, wood pieces or whatever. And one of the commandments it was commanded to put the person who breaks the Shabbos, put them to death or something like that.
Yes.
I don't remember exactly the verse, but so in this case, is that also requires the
witnesses? If you violate Shabbos, you're put to death. However, that person purposely, the story is that he
purposely
the daughters of Tzlafchad's father. When we get to that Parsha, it's an unbelievable Parsha. He knew exactly what he was doing, and they warned him. They followed all the warnings, and he said, "I know, I'm not allowed to do this, and if I do it, I'll be put to death." And they killed him. Now, there's much more to that story. He did it on purpose to prove a point. And you see, because his daughters were like the most righteous. They were like unbelievable women. And the Torah talks about them twice, and we get extra mitzvahs because of them. And he wanted to show people, but to keep it simple, when we get there in a few Parshias, we'll talk about it. Yes, that he was warned, and for violating the Shabbos, you get put to death. Now, it almost never happened because, again, what a situation like that where two people warning you and just never happened. But you're absolutely right. Good call. Okay. Now what happens is after 6 years, a person wants to 6 years he becomes free. What if he doesn't want to become free? He doesn't want to become free, which is a big no. But God says if you want to do that, you can do that. What they would do is they would take his ear, a very bizarre mitzvah. They'd take his ear, put it onto a doorpost, and pierce his ear on the doorpost. And they say, okay, fine, you can remain a slave, remain an Eved. Why did they do that? Why did they pierce his ear? So the tradition is because the same ear that heard, do not steal from God's mouth, one of the 10 commandments, do not steal, stole. And clearly you did not listen properly. And so we want to drill it into your ear. Once again, drill it into your head that don't steal. Whatever. That's what it is. And you shouldn't have done that. And okay, kind of weird. Doesn't really make so much sense. I took you out, but the bigger sin, why is God very upset about it? It's not a very looked upon thing, because God said, I took you out to be free. And here you are selling yourself back into slavery. On a deeper level, it means like this. You're basically giving up on your divine mission. Why is God upset? For 6 years, you did what you accomplished what you needed to accomplish. God said, all you need to do is 6 years. Do 6 years of hard labor, so to speak. It's not even so hard. Do 6 years of labor and get the message, and you'll be fine. And here you are, you basically suspended your divine mission. And here you are continuing to suspend your divine mission. And God says, you just don't understand. And I'm upset about it. You can continue to do it. It's an easy life. Basically, you're looking for an easy way out. All your needs are provided for you. Your master can provide you with a family. Now, here is a very bizarre mitzvah. Ready for the most bizarre mitzvah? The rabbi himself, Rabbi Elimelech, it makes him very uncomfortable, this mitzvah. There's a mitzvah of we're talking about a Jewish slave. Yeah, a Jew owns a Jewish slave, a Jewish eved, really, a servant. Even if the guy's married, he's got kids, the slave owner, the servant owner, can give a non-Jewish servant to this man to build a family. And the children belong to the slave owner. So if he goes free, the children remain with the slave owner. Very bizarre. I don't know if it actually happened. I'm not sure if it ever happened. A lot of these mitzvahs, a lot of these interesting things. A wayward son, we'll learn about that. Never happened. A whole city that gets burnt down, a whole city of Avodah Zarah serving idol worship. You're supposed to burn down the entire city and kill everyone. It never happened. I don't know if this ever happened, but nevertheless, it is a mitzvah. It is a mitzvah at the end of the day. It's the divine will. Anyway, you're stealing from God, so to speak. What God makes him upset is because you're stealing from me. Basically, I gave you this divine mission. I gave you a soul, and here you are squandering it. Not a very good thing. So Kabbalistically speaking, though, there's a concept. Why 6 years, and the 7th year you go free? And this also fits in. We work for 6 years, and the 7th year is a year of going free, a year of Shemitah. This whole concept that there's in Kabbalah, it explains, Kabbalah of the Arizal, it explains that for 6 millennium, we will work, meaning we will do mitzvahs, and there'll be like a period of galus, exile, which is what we're in right now. And in the 7th millennia, there'll be a year of Mashiach, a year of freedom. That it'll start the era of freedom. And the Arizal says that mitzvahs will become batal. There won't be mitzvahs anymore in the 7th millennium. When does the 7th millennium start? It doesn't start in the year 7,000. It starts in the year 6,000, right? Because that's the 7th year. It's once the 7th year begins, not when the 7,000th year starts. It's when you're in the 7th year. What does it mean? Mitzvahs will be batal. It means that, in a very simple, nullified. It means that the kedusha, what mitzvahs are able to accomplish, it won't shine like it could have, like it did during the times of exile. Just to tell you, we're in the year 5782, which means we're late in the 6th millennia. We're almost in the 7th millennia. In other words, it's almost what's called Shabbos. Shabbos is the 7th day. It's late Friday afternoon. If you divide the years up into millennias, up into days of the week, which we do Kabbalistically speaking, we're late in Friday afternoon. And there's a concept that you can take in Shabbos early. We do it in our community, in a lot of communities. You take in Shabbos early. Actually, everybody takes in Shabbos early. But you can take it in very early. You can take it in, sometimes even 2 hours earlier. So the Rebbe would always point this out, that we can bring in Mashiach closer and earlier. In other words, the Shabbos, the seventh millennia, we can bring it in early because you're allowed to bring in Shabbos early. That's just like a little Kabbalistic thing behind it. Torah goes on to speak about a second wife. You're allowed to have a second wife. You can have multiple wives, up to 7 wives. Very frowned upon in Judaism. The patriarchs did not want to take multiple wives. We saw that Avram didn't want to take a second wife. He did it because his wife told him. Sarah told him to take a second wife, but he didn't want to. Yitzchak only had one wife, right? Rivka. And Yaakov, Jacob, also only wanted to have one wife. He only wanted to marry Rachel, but Rachel gave him Leah. And then Leah gave her maid. And then Rachel couldn't get pregnant, so she gave her maid. But ultimately, he didn't want to. We see that very much leaders of Klal Yisrael, of the Jewish people, did not have second wives. 1,000 years ago, Rabbeinu Gershom sent who was the leader of the Jewish people, the Posek Hador. He was the main rabbi of the generation of the Ashkenazi Jewry about 1,000 years ago, and he said, "You're not allowed to take more than one wife because we can't handle it. You can't." In order to take one wife, you're not allowed to diminish your relationship with your first wife. Who can I'm saying if you want to have a proper relationship, you can't split your time with multiple people. It's impossible. So about 1,000 years ago, he did away with it. Also, he said you can't open up anybody else's mail. That's one of the takanas, one of the decrees of Rabbeinu Gershom. You're not allowed to take more than one wife, but you could at some point. They really did it. People who really did it is because sometimes wives, they lived in a country where society wasn't, they couldn't do what they needed to do without a man, like Afghanistan, whatever. So they would take more than one wife, at least so she can obviously have a good life. But you couldn't do it after a certain period of time. There's you have 3 main rights or obligations to your wife: monetary obligations, domicile, you have to provide her with a shelter, and conjugal rights. There's a concept that if a woman came into the marriage, if she was very wealthy beforehand and you weren't, mister, you have to provide for her lifestyle. You have to keep up her lifestyle. Now, she can do away with that. She can say, look, you don't need to keep up. I was a princess. You don't need to work so hard. But that is the default. That is the obligation. And vice versa. If she did not grow up so well, but you did, and you have the means, you have to, it's called Milan. You only go up. We don't lower our standards. We only increase our standards. Again, the husband and wife can come to their own agreement and say, like, well, we want to make certain lifestyle changes. So I can be home more often with the kids. That obviously that's okay. There is something called prenuptials. We do believe in prenups. That's talks about in this week's Parsha. It's called nichsei tzoin barzel. If a woman comes in with her own money, her own property, she can stipulate in the contract, in the ketubah. The ketubah is a contract that the husband signs to say that I will provide for you these 3 basic necessities. And if I do not provide them for you, you can divorce me because I did not follow the contract. If she can write in the contract, you can't have any of this. So let's say she owns a bunch of real estate and it produces passive income. And she can say, this income belongs to me. You can't have any of that income. It's called nichsei tzoin barzel, and he can't have any of the income. Now, normally, whatever she acquires belongs to him, just like a child. Now, we don't say that. Sometimes you see it as like she's his property. Obviously, that's not PC, first of all, but it's not really true. But what we mean to say is whatever she acquires belongs to the husband. He gets it, unless it's all stipulated, unless it's written in a contract. Same thing with a child. The child's not really your property, but we say that whatever the child acquires goes to the parents, and same with servants. So we do believe in prenups, and there's a lot of very good Gemaras about that, talking about that. What if she passes away? what if it wasn't real estate? What if it wasn't buildings? She didn't own buildings, but she owned land. All she owned was land. And then he planted trees on it, fruit trees, and he wants to sell the fruit. Who does the money belong to? Does it belong to her or does it belong to him? How did she stipulate it? How did they set it up? The contracts are very holy. We very much believe in contracts. They protect the relationship. And it's always proper to make a contract whenever you can. It doesn't show on distance of the relationship. You're strengthening the relationship with the person by creating a contract. That's Judaism's belief, and that's why there's a lot of lawyers. Torah ends off the obligation to pay for sick leave. You have a worker, you get sick, or if you hurt him or her, you have to pay. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It means if you injure a person, you injure their eye, and now they can't perform their job so well until it heals, you have to compensate for that loss. You got to pay for the damages that you do. There's many different types of damages. There's embarrassment. You got to, if you did something that embarrassed somebody, you have to pay for that. Smack them with the back of your hand versus the front of your hand. Really talks about that. It's different levels of embarrassment. If you smack a person of prestige versus a person like who's poor and nobody really knows, there's different levels that you have to pay. And the court assesses how much you have to pay. Now you might think the Torah talks about paying doctors. Now you might think, why should we pay a doctor? Should we even go to a doctor? If God is the one that gave you the sickness, God forbid, who are you to try to fix it? It says the Torah, nope. Your job is to fix it. Your job is to go to a doctor, and you have to pay the doctor. Yirapo, yirapeh. You shall certainly, pay him or her for the work that they did for you. That's pretty much how it ends. So there's myriad these tort cases of embarrassment, of damages. There are tons of Gemaras, tons of oral tradition, thousands of volumes, hundreds of thousands of volumes written on it. How to draw up a contract, write a contract properly. Just to say something very interesting, my wife she was an attorney. She just stopped practicing, and she was in business law, the business group. So mergers and acquisitions. Now on Passover, we sell our chametz. You're not allowed to own your chametz. Yeah, your leavened bread. So you sell it, and we actually make a contract. We sell, if you're in Chabad, we actually sell all of our chametz to the rabbi. Then the rabbi takes ownership of it. You sign a contract. And then the rabbi sells the chametz, his own chametz, but it's like, everybody's chametz. And so let's say you own a restaurant. Let's say you own a supermarket. And now the supermarket has a bunch of chametz in it. Yeah, you sell Chips Ahoy cookies or whatever. You sell cookies in there. You can't own it on Passover because you can't own chametz on Passover. So you sell it to a non-Jew. And it's a buy-sell agreement. He buys it and sells it. He has it for like 8 days, 9 days. And then you buy it back. And it's a real contract. It's not just a ritual. And you can look up articles on Google and you will see crazy stories. The guy who owns all of the beer, basically like the biggest beer importer, Sam Adams, Heineken, it's all owned by one guy, a Jewish guy. And it was like, it's all under the okay supervision. Whatever, look it up. It recently happened. He didn't want to sell. Did he really sell? He wasn't sure. You can't take the money. Whatever, it was a big, not a scandal, but you should look it up. It's a very interesting case. So let's say you own, what happened? You got to sell your stuff. My wife, it's a non-Jewish firm, and she gets a contract from a guy in Texas who has a partnership with a non-Jewish guy who has a partnership with 2 Israelis. I don't think I'm allowed to say this. I don't know if this is like a breach of confidentiality, but I think it's okay. So she gets this contract, and the contract says the 2 Israelis are selling their business to this guy, to this third partner. And he doesn't know. I guess they're not like really big partners. He's just like a monetary partner, but they sell, it was like they own pharmaceuticals, but it had chametz in the drugs. So they sold it to the guy, and the guy was like, "What is this?" And he starts flipping out, and he sends it to his lawyer. Who's his lawyer? One of the partners in my wife's law firm. And they sent her the contract and said, "Can you look over this contract?" She had to represent the non-Jew in buying the chametz from these two other Jews. And it was a huge, and it was like a day before Passover. It was a big deal. We actually had to bring in the rabbi to look over the contract. And we had to write back. Well, not we. I wasn't really part of it. Saying that this is a real contract and you really have to sign this. These guys cannot hold on to their chametz. Now, these guys themselves weren't even frum. They weren't necessarily like shomer kashrus, but they had a kosher supervision on it. They were under the who were they under? In California, like whatever, the OU, let's say. It wasn't the OU, but let's say it was the OU, and the OU said you better sell your chametz, you better sell your share in the company in order to, if you want to continue to have our certification on it. And they did, and the guy signed it, and it's all good. And I just want to say, just on that note, very interesting, Coca-Cola has a secret ingredient. Nobody's allowed to know the ingredients of Coca-Cola. But Coca-Cola went to Rabbi Landau, who is the big Rav, a big rabbi in Bnei Brak, Israel. He's a Lubavitcher. Well, he actually just passed away, but he was a Lubavitcher. But he was the big rabbi for like all of the Jewish people. And they said, we want you to have a certification. You have to, we want the okay. We want like a certification, your certification on our Coca-Cola. And he said, well, okay, fine, but you have to show me all the ingredients. And they said, there's only 2 people in the world that know our ingredients. We don't tell anybody the ingredients. It's like locked in a safe or something. He's like, well, I'm not giving the certification. And they gave it to him. He was one of 3 people that knew all of the ingredients to Coca-Cola. And because of that, everybody trusts Rabbi Landau. So now everybody says Coca-Cola is totally kosher. Rabbi Landau would have Coca-Cola on his table on Passover. He wouldn't drink from it, but he had it on his table for Passover just to prove that it's 100% kosher for Passover. Okay, that's what I wanted. Anybody have any questions?
I actually have a question about for the selling of chametz. If it's a corporate asset, though, is that really considered owned by an individual? I mean, is it because it's a privately held company versus like, I don't know, like a publicly held company? Because if it's publicly held, if you're a stockholder, do you have to sell your stuff?
Excellent question. What if you're a stockholder in a company? What if you're a real owner in the company? So Reb Moshe Feinstein, who was the Rabbi Landau, so to speak, of his generation, said, it's so minute. You don't really have ownership in the company. You don't have a say. You own 4 shares in a company, even if you own probably 4 million shares, in Coca-Cola, you're not really an owner. You don't really have a say in the company. Therefore, it's not true ownership. And therefore you don't have to give up your stock during that period of time. It's a very good question. So in a corporate, I think in general in corporate America, if you own a public company, I think it depends on how many shares you have, how many shares are out there, how much control do you really have? And you have to assess it. It's kind of subjective. And then you have to do accordingly. But for most part, these big companies, you don't need to. Now that beer case, the guy does own the company. It's not a public company. And he owns, I don't know, he owns Heineken. He owns all the big ones, Sam Adams, Heineken, Budweiser. I don't know about Budweiser. But he owns and it was it's a huge problem. It was a huge problem that he kept the money for Passover. He signed the thing, but then he still took all the money. And like everyone was saying that you got to strip away his hechsher, his kashrus. But I'm not sure exactly what they did. Then he eventually did it the right way, this guy. But you should look it up. It's very interesting. But it's a good question. Very good question.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
A lot of legal aspects of like legal discussions based on Torah, they were so intense and so compelling, actually. There's a lot to learn within the modern even legal systems from Torah.
Yes, they're the best. I actually want to get Rabbi Eli Melech to give a class about them.
Right. Even like the halachic laws.
Rabbi Eli Melech, he's on the forefront. You might not know, but he's one of the big. He writes books and he has opinions, and he's one of the head of the Bezdins in America. He has to give his own rulings and stuff. He knows like all about. He knows about how electricity works. He knows about how what ingredients are in certain foods that you would never even like, all these like, I mean, maybe you do as well, but all these different like weird foods and chemistry stuff. He has to know all that, and he has to keep up with it in order to give his own ruling. Technology is a big thing that you got to keep up with. How does it work? Can I use it on Shabbos or not?
Okay, so speaking of Rabbi Elimelech, is he gonna teach this Wednesday or he's traveling?
No, he's away. That's a good question. So Rabbi Schneer's class will also be tomorrow, I think, because he's gonna be away Wednesday. So Rabbi Schneer's party's class will be tomorrow, I think, at noon. And Elimelech's class will not be Wednesday night.
Okay, so I had some questions regarding kosher stuff between meat and dairy type of very deep